Hi, and thanks for tuning in to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna. At the Path 11 podcast, we are here trying to deliver leading-edge research on consciousness, healing, and metaphysics. And just like you, we are trying to answer the big questions about life. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is our purpose? We hope by listening to our podcast, it will make each day you live on Earth a little easier to understand. And now for today's podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Path 11 podcast. We are doing a little bit of a series here on induced after-death communication, and I was able to find another person who was willing to talk about their therapy experience with this type of method to come on the show. So I am very excited to introduce you to Michol Mae. She is the founder of Lady Mae Impressions. A renegade artist, she weaves her wisdom, knowledge, and experience into her artwork, novels, poetry, meditation, and music as a way to bring awareness and normalize mental health. She's also the author of Ashes of the Phoenix, a collection of healing poems that we're actually going to have her read, maybe one or two today. And she is a woman who has experienced a lot of loss in her life. And that's kind of what our podcast is about. We're here to share stories about death, about the afterlife. Is there an afterlife? Trying to answer these questions. And Michol is also going to share her story about doing induced after-death communication therapy with her therapist. So Michol, welcome to the Path 11 podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, April. I love to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to meet you and was hoping that maybe we could start off this podcast a little bit with a little bit about you, your background. It sounds like you're an artist here. You have your hands in a bunch of different things. I know I mentioned Ashes of the Phoenix of one book, but you had sent me quite a few things to read. So I think you also are co-author of a couple of others that I didn't get to mention. So, would love for you to just share a little bit about your life and yourself with our audience.
Oh, of course. Yes, I do. I have 3 other books I was a co-author. They are all best-selling books on Amazon, and they go through and they go through different points in my life experience. And I share that because I hope that other people will find it and realize that they're not alone, and that other people also have these feelings and these emotions, and that they can get through these really difficult times. A little bit about my background. I think my first loss was when I was 11. I lost my Nana and my Papa. They were living with me at the time, and my mother and I had become their caregiver. I lost my mom when I was 15. So that was the next really big loss. But I've pretty much lost almost all my grandparents, an uncle who I never even got to meet. And that sounds weird to folks when they're like, well, you never met him. How did you lose him? But, you do still grieve those folks. My dad tells a lot of stories about my uncle, and, I love those stories. And same with his dad. I didn't get to meet him because he passed when my dad was 11. And you still grieve those folks, those relationships that you never even got to have, those relationships where you're like, oh man, if he was here, my dating life would be drastically. So, from there, I lost 3 people, sadly, to suicide. So I'm very passionate about bringing awareness to mental health, because I feel like in society, we tend to get uncomfortable. And when we get uncomfortable, we're like, oh, let's move on, or let's sweep that aside, or we'll just be happy, right? Like, just move on. Oh, why aren't you over that yet? And I experienced that with my mom too, because people thought that I should, 2 years later, I should just be over not having a mother anymore at the age of 17. And I feel like, when we don't talk about mental health, right, it sort of festers inside of us because we're not letting it out. We're not giving it the stage it needs to express itself. So I like to talk about the uncomfortable things, even if I'm uncomfortable myself or if other people are uncomfortable. I lost a few friends as well. One of them was probably the most influential man in my life. His name was Dave, and he was a first responder to 9/11. And so later they think now, right, that it was probably complications to the stuff from down there. And it was unexpected, and he was 41. So I've lost a lot of people at very young ages. I myself am a trauma survivor, so I talk a little bit about those uncomfortable things too. But grief is something that I really have gotten very, very familiar with. I used to be honest, full disclosure, used to busy it away. I did for a really long time. I was like, oh, gotta stay busy. I'm an artist. So I'm doing all these projects and writing music and writing books and painting and any ADHD hyper focus at the moment, right? I'm down that path. But when I lost my boy, Johnny, I just could not busy it away. But it was a grief that was so profound. I honestly, in all honesty, did not think I would ever feel joy or happiness again. I did not think I could come out the other side of that. I really fully believed that in my heart. I got up every day because I had another child to care for. And I got up every day knowing that I didn't want to become a shell of who I was, if nothing else for her. And later I learned that I should have wanted to heal for myself, but I was just in such a bad place. And I did choose to heal. I chose to go see my therapist. I chose to find someone, an additional therapist that would help, right? So I was definitely going through the steps. And that was probably one of the most profound things in my life where I was like, oh my gosh, I really didn't do this for me. And that's a moment also where you realize that, well, where's your self-compassion and self-love, which was also something I struggled with. So that's a little bit about me. I mean, there's so much, but that's as quick as I can boil it down.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you speak of something very profound, which is like taking care of your own grief is an act of self-care and self-love, and very important. And, what I have found just as being a mental health therapist too, is that I always say, like, you can run from grief, but you can't hide. And eventually it will catch up. It may feel like a slow runner behind you, but eventually it will show up. It will show up either in the physical body, it'll show up in the mental body, in the spiritual body, especially if we, like you say, busy it away, with all those things. And granted, like some of the stuff that you were doing is a very creative outlet, which is another form of therapy. Not everybody needs mental health therapy or talk therapy to be able to move through their grief experiences. I would say it helps, and I always advocate for it 100%. But, it's like people can turn to other forms and modalities, but it also sounds like maybe for you, it was a little bit more of a distraction.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, I was very fortunate, and I talk about this in some of my writing. I was very, very, very lucky in that my mother was an advocate for me to read and play music. Like, she was 100% my advocate for those creative outlets. She never was like, what are you going to do with your life? She was like, here, play an instrument, And so I picked up the cello. It was my first instrument, and I went from there. But in middle school, when I lost my mother and I was clearly struggling, my English teacher actually pulled me aside and took the time to cultivate my writing, because he could see in my writing. And then my counselor. So even though I haven't officially had a therapist my whole entire life, right? Like, I was always willing to work on myself. So I always went to the school counselor. She handed me, and this is actually in one of the co-author books. She handed me a Maya Angelou journal that had little poems from Maya Angelou. And it changed my life, because at that point I learned that I can outlet my feelings, and I write in many ways to process my feelings. So in one of the books, Gifts of Wisdom, I write, and it's in Ashes of the Phoenix as well, a poetic letter to myself, because that's my way of going back and saying, what would I say to my childhood self? Or sometimes I'm building actually meditative creative writing courses now, because they help to process your emotions. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a creative writer. You don't have to be a meditation person, right? You can be one or none of any of those things and still get the benefit of just stepping out of that ego mind, taking a second. And in a way, you're honoring your feelings and your emotions. Like, one of my exercises is I kind of like go around about way, and I'm like, what's your favorite color? And then what's your least favorite color? And we do a little meditation on that. And then you give them form and shape, and you can communicate with them, which is an interesting, weird way to just talk to your feelings, right? Talk to your emotions find out where they're coming from. What does this mean? Why are they there? You know,
I love that.
and so I enjoy that so much.
She said that. I'm like, okay, hot pink or pink is one of my favorite. My least is like yellow. I like will not wear yellow. I don't have yellow in my wardrobe. It doesn't look good against my skin. So that'll be fun. I might like try that myself and maybe put it into like an art piece and see what that looks like. Now I like the two together. Pink and yellow look very nice together, but
they look nice together. The other thing I tell folks unofficially, right, because I've done a lot of chakra meditation and stuff and training, is look at what you might be blocked in, right? So yellow, right, is I think your solar plexus, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So like, you know, okay, well, what's going on there? I didn't like yellow either. I hated it. I really did. And it's supposed to be a joyful color. So
right.
What is this mean? But I love to do that because you can. And actually, after doing that exercise for myself, I actually don't dislike some of the colors as much as I did because now I have like a different affinity for them.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, you know, kind of giving form to that, talking to that. And definitely I have had some stomach chakra things that I was working on, just healed through integrative medicine or naturopathic medicine, some heartburn this year. So maybe my relationship with yellow will improve. But for sure, there really is that connection, you know, like you're talking about, that mind, body, soul connection with everything, with our feelings, our experiences, and how we play them out in life. And I actually made a little bit of a note about Maya Angelou because I love her work as well. And love that you were also inspired by her. And I had the chance to review and read some of your poem collections, and they were really wonderful. I really love them. They're so like rich, raw, and real. And that's the type of poetry that I love. Like, I love poetry. It's, you know, fun to have like metaphors and stuff like that. But I'm a pretty straightforward person. So like, I love when people just like give it to me straight and like pour their heart out. And that's what your poetry like was for me. I was like, okay, I know exactly how she's feeling, where she was at, you know, and you just feel like when you're reading Ashes of the Phoenix that we're like jumping into your world for a little bit, you know, and experiencing a lot of what you had gone through. So, yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about your mom? Because one, we selected a poem for you to read out of the book about her, or that you wrote about her. And also your mom is the one that you decided to select to do your induced after death communication session on, even though, you know, Johnny was, you know, a really huge loss for you. And you've had many. I mean, I stopped counting when it passed 5 on one hand. So, you know, I mean, you've definitely have experienced a lot of loss, you know, and you look very young. So, you know, at an early age, and you know, that's a lot of loss to experience in a short period of time here on Earth. So yeah, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background about maybe the really great things about your mom and the relationship, and maybe some of the struggles that there might have been, and, you know, what you needed to process during your grief experience in therapy. And then we'll talk about the induced after death communication.
Oh, yes, sure. So with my mom, it was a little complicated. My mom was a very young mother. So she had me when she was about 17, and I was the byproduct of, I suppose it was an affair. You know, she was the babysitter, and she, you know, fell in love or in lust or in something with my father, who was in his 30s at the time. And so she whisked me away, and she kind of ran away to another state. And so I grew up down south with her. And I suppose if you read some of my earlier poetry, you'll see that I struggled a lot because my mother had really volatile outbursts from time to time. But the woman was absolutely amazing in that she never, ever shunned my emotion. Like, so the school would call and say, she's a straight A student, but she is so sensitive. And my mother would just say, that is just how she is. And that was it. You know, it was never like, you're too sensitive, don't do this. I didn't get a lot of touchy-feely, huggy-holdy from my mom. You know, she was very busy. She was trying to just provide for us. When I was sick, you know, she was there. Again, you know, I mentioned earlier, putting me, honestly, in music as early as she did was phenomenal. I at one point when I was very little believed because I was a big Rainbow Bright fan. For those of you who don't know, Rainbow Bright.
Yes.
Sing away, right? The clouds and make magical things happen. And one day I had to be like 6 or 7 years old, and I was singing to Sing Away the Rain, and it stopped raining. And I believed wholeheartedly that I could affect the weather. And my mother never really tried to dull any of that. She put me in the church choir. As soon as an instrument program was available, she's like, pick an instrument. I want you to play the instrument. And when I hit my preteen, very difficult years for those of you who have them, we all know, and I wanted to quit. She wouldn't let me. And she drove me to perfection. And there are some downsides to that, but I have the education I have now because of my mother. And I certainly am who I am because of her dedication to raising me. And, the downside is she had a very explosive temper. She was emotionally a little volatile. I learned later why that was. And I think that that's a very important message that a lot of folks probably miss and might need to hear. And that is your relationship with your parents drastically changes, and how you feel about them drastically changes when you can look at them and see their trauma and see more of them as a person, not a parent. Because as a kid, you're just like, you are supposed to love me and care for me, and I am the center of your universe. And why are you doing this to me? And you're not seeing the sleepless nights. You're not seeing the working 2 jobs. You're not seeing the stress of, oh my God, is the power going to be turned off? You're not seeing the migraines and the health issues. My mom had cancer. We don't know how long she had it for. So there's one called My Mother's Demon. I almost accidentally picked that one, right? I wrote that about the cancer. All right. I like to believe wholeheartedly, I do believe that between stress and the cancer, that was her volatility. But when I was a teenager, I didn't know that. I didn't have the wherewithal to really fully understand that. So I just was like, well, this was my experience, and I was traumatized, and what the hell, but she was a phenomenal woman for everything she's been through. And her story is insane. A single mother home. Her mother was an alcoholic. Her father was in prison, and he was abusive, which is probably why her mother was an alcoholic. She was probably self-medicating. She almost burned the house down once because she fell asleep with a lit cigarette. And so my mother, being the oldest, was also a caregiver. So that's all she really knew, is this a really unhealthy, codependent life. And, I will say this also, my mom did not hesitate when I told her someone did something inappropriate to me when I was a child. And I think it might have cost her job, because it was somebody that we called the grandma and grandpa. They weren't real grandma and grandpa, right? But, she worked for them, and that's what we called them. And I told her I freaked out, and I was very young. I was probably between 6 and 8 years old, and I didn't want to go, and I was so scared. And as a kid, you don't see the job part of it, right? I didn't reflect on that until later, when I was like, oh my God, she really, no doubt, no question. That's it. They were gone from our lives. And, I think that that's a really powerful thing. And I think that took a lot of bravery on my mother's part to not brush it off as, well, you're just being sensitive, right? Or just brush it off as well, that would never happen. Because a lot of times that's what happens with childhood abuse, right? People don't want to see it. So I want to give her so much credit for that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like even though she kind of had a little bit of this volatile side and a little bit of anger there, that she really was a great cheerleader for you, an advocate, a support, clearly wanted to make sure that you excelled, putting those instruments in your hand, getting you to write, and absolutely, and believing you as a 6, 7, or 8-year-old, coming to her and letting her know that something inappropriate was going on, and her believing, and bam, this is it, 100%. That's pretty beautiful. Not a lot of people who disclose their abuse, one, are believed, and sometimes it could be really hard for parents to digest that information and maybe want to just imagine it or wish it away and be like, oh, maybe it's just in the kid's imagination. So really great that your mom stood up for you in that.
It was amazing. I didn't realize at the time, obviously, because I was very young. And the wife of the grandma, she actually was in denial even years and years, 20, 30 years later after he had passed. She was still like, no, that didn't happen. So it was really profound. And then, something did happen to me later when I was a teenager and my mom was gone and my father did not believe me, So it was like to realize that like that was really a gift and that she did do her best to make me safe after the fact, which is something that we all struggle with when something like that happens to us as a child. Well, why didn't you keep me safe? Well, she would have if she knew. And She did as soon as she did know. Right. And so that's really profound.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was your mom's name?
Lori.
Lori. Okay. I always like to put a name with a face that I'm imagining. So, okay, Lori, way to go, Lori. I cheer you for that 100%. So I know before we kind of hopped on and pressed the record button, you had shared with me that you had done a lot of work on the loss of your son, Johnny, in therapy. And then when you were working with your therapist and the therapist introduced you to this new therapy. Well, it's not really a new therapy, but that you could do this induced after death communication, that you had both decided, well, why don't we select my mom? Because we did a lot of work around Johnny's death and let's select, working on my mom. So you lost your mom when you were 15. How old were you when you tried this type of therapy?
I was 44. And it's interesting because I didn't know it existed. And I brought it to my therapist because I went to Salem, Massachusetts with a group of friends for Halloween. And we went into a room and there was a guy doing readings that was also a therapist. And he's like, oh, have you tried EMDR? Have you tried afterlife death communication? I was like, yes, EMDR, but what is that? What is the other thing? And so when I came back, I was like, hey, so he mentioned this. And she just, again, amazing person. She just ran with it. She was like, oh, let me go. She went right down the rabbit hole. And I was really happy to be one of her first people to actually participate in it and to try it because it was just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So why don't you explain a little bit of the process of what you remember? Because you're going to make me do math. 15 and 44, that's over, 15, almost 20 some odd years after mom, passes. So why don't you explain a little bit of what that process was like going through it? For those of you who have never heard of induced after death communication therapy, it is a process that does include EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a type of backed up procedure, the protocol that we use in therapy. Sorry, I was losing my words right there. That's backed by science. It's been well researched. It's been used a lot in the VA with veterans, and the founder kind of tweaked the EMDR protocol a little bit in order to help people reach their core sadness of the loss with the veterans that he was working on. And he found that once he did that, the veterans that had lost friends during combat were starting to get messages from them. So that's kind of a very short little tidbit of how this came to be. But yeah, so tell me a little bit about, walk us through your 2 sessions. And I know sometimes people don't always need 2 sessions. Sometimes the after death communication can happen in the first. But why don't you walk us through the sessions and what had happened for you?
Yeah, so I absolutely loved it. I went in and I chose to do hand vibrations, right? So she gave me 2 things, one to hold in each hand, and I could feel them vibrating from one side to the other. And since I've done meditation, it was pretty easy for me to fall into the meditation. However, since I'm also a very analytical person, sometimes my mind is a little resistant. So initially I was a little resistant to it. I wasn't sure about it, even though I do these kinds of things all the time. I don't know. Maybe I was a little scared, or I think I was scared that nothing would happen. I think that's really what I was scared of, like that nothing would happen. And then I wouldn't get to experience any of that. So once I relaxed a little bit, kind of let it go. One of the techniques I used myself is, so for all you overthinkers out there and all you over analytical folks, it doesn't matter if it's a spiritual message or if it's your brain giving you the message, right? So even if, because I'm in this loop of my brain, like, well, what is this? Is it really real? Is it not real? What am I doing over here? Is this woo-woo stuff? Or is this like, what is this? Right. And I'm a spiritual person, but I still was kind of stuck in this. And I said, what, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Where it comes from doesn't matter. What matters is the message, because if it's coming from your mind, or if it's coming from spirit, or if it's coming from, your therapist, right? It's still a message meant for you. So once I got there, I relaxed a little bit. I fell into the groove. I really liked the feeling of the vibration. So I'm really glad I went in to do it instead of doing like a remote session. Like that was really critical for me. And I just focused on my mom. What was amazing is that it wasn't just my mom that I got to visit with. And it was almost like imagine just having a safe space. Like I don't recall any kind of setting, right? I was just in this like safe space. It was just like a cocoon of the universe that I just sat in. It was dark and it was just, there was no other distractions. And my mom definitely came through. With her, I used to tell Johnny and my daughter, who was also named Lori, I used to tell them that we had a whole army of people on the other side, right? Because that was my way of like, we lost so many people, but they're still with us. And I wanted to keep them close. And that is very much what it felt like. It was like my mom came in, we talked. There was a little bit of guidance there for me to kind of process through some stuff. And it was absolutely amazing because I did get to hear from her. Because when you lose a mom at that young of an age, or any age really, like you miss them for all your major moments, your graduation or your college graduation, or, if you get married, whatever the major events are. And for me, taking in, the children and becoming a parent and, trying to do my best, I had a lot of second guessing myself having lost Johnny, right? So it was very, very powerful to be able to hear her say she's proud of me. That's not something I got to have because she's been gone.
Right.
And so it makes me tear up even now. And, to just have honest discussions. And again, you can't get caught up on, is this real? You have to kind of just take it on faith. Either you can lean into your faith or you can lean into, these are just messages that I need to have myself. Right. So it was really powerful for me, though. I really did feel like it was, like I was being visited. I did feel that. I felt like my mom, she showed up. Johnny showed up. My Nana and Papa, I got to see them. Haven't seen them since I was 11. It was so crazy. So it was really, really, really profound. And I definitely would recommend it to anyone who has experienced like profound loss. But at the end of the day, it was so positive. Like there wasn't, and I think that's the other thing I was afraid of. Like, what if somebody on the other side's mad at me? What if they're going to like be upset and say something mean? Or what if they're going to confirm my worst fears, And that is not, it was such a place of love and family and reassurance. And it was amazing.
Oh, so beautiful. I'm so happy you had that experience too. And in order to get there though, part of the facilitation is really challenging the person, the client, you, to get in touch with the deepest parts of your sadness. And so you're kind of talking about the fun stuff that kind of happens. And I have a couple of questions too about the fun stuff too. But, how I kind of want people to hear what it's like to face your sadness, like the depths of the sadness, because I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. A lot of people are afraid like, well, if I go there, I'll never stop crying. Or if I go there, I might really want to die myself. Or we almost fear, we fear what we can't see. So maybe you might be able to give people some courage and inspiration of what it's like to turn in, face the deepest parts of your sadness during, like a session like this in order to hopefully have the chance to experience the beauty of what you experienced.
Yeah. So I did a 3-year apprenticeship as a shaman. So I learned early on with journeying, right? One of the risks is that you might like it so much in this other world that you've created that you don't want to come back. So you have to have an agreement to come back. So I still had a little bit of a fear because I was like, well, this is different. This isn't that. And what if I go there and I'm with the people I love and I don't want to come back? That was a genuine fear that I had. And then, in terms of facing, it wasn't just my sadness that was scary and difficult. It was the guilt, the blame, the shame the uncertainty, like maybe she'll think it's my fault, that Johnny isn't with us anymore. And that is really, really difficult. And everyone that experiences grief, yes, you have to get to that deepest point of your sadness. But for those of you that might have more complex grief, where like maybe there was more to it, that can be extra scary because now you're like, well, I was kind of a brat before my mom died. I was 15. She asked me to come back home, but because she had been so volatile with me, I said no. I refused to believe she was going to pass away. I had a lot of guilt. Like if I had been there, because I had taken care of her when she had migraines before. So in my child brain, right, I believe if I was there, she would still be here. And so at that point, and we all have some level of that at some point when we lose people. What if I did this different? What if I did that different? What if whatever? What if I was psychic and I knew? But you're not, and you don't. And the reality and the truth of it is, if you could have done better, you would have. We're all just doing our best from day to day. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always feel like that, but I had very real fears with meeting with my mom because I didn't get the closure that I needed. And I think that's what made this experience all the more profound for me because I didn't get the closure, right? Because I didn't get a chance to have those conversations with her and to say, I'm sorry. And that alone can be one of the hardest things for people to do, to apologize, genuinely apologize from a place where you feel like that is your final apology. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have to do it again and again and again and again and again because you really mean this. Like, I'm really sorry that I was such a little terror when I was in my teenage years, and she understood, but I had to face the ugly parts, not just of my grief, but of myself. And that's not pleasant. Nobody wants to be like, wow, you were a brat. Like, right. Oh my goodness. Like, well, you were like very difficult to deal with because of your trauma. Sure. And that's not something to be ashamed of, but you might still feel shame. I still felt shame. I still felt like I could have saved her. So I had not just profound sadness at her being gone all these years through all of these events and not being able to call her for advice, but I also had profound blame. I really, truly, as a child, believed that if I had gone back home, she would be here today. Mm-hmm. And so having to face that was very, very difficult. So yes, I did talk about a lot of the good stuff, but I had to go through some hurdles. I didn't get to see her right away because of those hurdles. Mm-hmm. My therapist had to walk me through what I was feeling, what I was thinking, where I was going with that. And thankfully, I already had the EMDR experience with my therapist to it's easy for me to fall into, okay, we're going to go with this right now. Let's follow this train of thought until where we get to trying to get to the root of it, which is why I love this kind of therapy because I'm a big proponent of, can we get to the root? Right. Same with mental health. Can we get to the root? Because if we can get to the root, then we can figure out ways and tools to help us with the root. The other really profound thing that I have come to realize over the years is sometimes we have a blockage of not wanting to heal because we don't know who we are without our grief and without our trauma. Or we might believe that if we acknowledge our sadness or if we can somehow mitigate our sadness, it diminishes our love for that person. Because grief is love with no place else to go, right? Like that it's as long as you love someone, you'll grieve them and grief can always come. But after death communication doesn't stop you from ever grieving again. That's not the goal of it. That's not what happens, but it does give you another thing to lean on, another tool in the toolbox, another way to help you when you have those big moments. I still have grief bursts. I still have moments where I miss my people. But I know now that I can get through it, and being able to connect with them on the other side really helped me feel more, this is going to sound weird, but a little bit more solid in my grief. Mm-hmm. It made me feel like I understand my grief. I can lean into my grief. And people think that's weird when I say that, but it's necessary for grief processing to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And so do you feel like after this experience, was there a shift in the self-blame, in that blame and guilt?
There was. And it's very interesting. I won't say it's like magic, right? But I won't say that it's gone forever, like completely. But I can tell you, since I did this experience, I definitely do not have the same level. Like, so if I was at a level 10, I'm at like a level 3, you know, on my bad days. And sometimes I don't even think about the would have, could have, should have, you know, and then I have bad days where I do, you know, but when I do, it's not as intense as it was.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I'd love to do another session. Maybe I can get that tool.
Yeah. I mean, hey, if you were walking around with that, you know, deep, just intrusive, like feelings and memories of, you know, this self-blame at a 10, and now you might carry it at a 3, you know, 10 pounds, 3 pounds. I think anybody would choose 3 pounds to, you know, walk up a mountain with a backpack rather than 10 pounds on their back too. So yeah, it does feel like magic, I'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had a client say, I don't know what you did to me, but whatever you did worked, you know, he just loved it. He didn't want to understand it, but he was like, I don't care what this is, but thank you, you know? Yeah. So thank you for sharing all of that, because I think that that's important for people to hear. And I think people that move into these areas of grief with all the different types of emotions and come out the other side and say, oh my God, I am lighter for it. And it doesn't mean that I've lost my love for these people, you know, like I can love these people also without some of this pain, you know, like that can become the identity of the love and our connection with them. So I think that you'll give people a lot of courage to maybe step into their grief a little bit more. So let's talk about the fun stuff. Okay. So let's go back to when you actually made contact with them. And, you know, you were using the words like, I saw them, I talked to them. So, you know, what I know in applying this technique is that there are times after the eye movement that we will ask our clients to just close their eyes and allow whatever needs to happen. And so can you explain a little bit like how you saw them and, you know, were your eyes closed? And was it more of like that period of time when the therapist kind of stops the session and allows you to process with your eyes closed is when this experience happened for you?
Yes. Yes. So there is a point in the experience where my therapist is like, okay, I'm going to be quiet and allow this to happen. And I did have my eyes closed. As you guys have already heard now, I am an artist, right? So I've always had a very vivid imagination and I've always set up stories. I could see them in my mind, right? When I'm writing novels, that's what happens. And that is very much how it felt for me. So as soon as I closed my eyes, it was like I was in this safe, cozy space. And it was like just people just started walking into my space. They were just walking into my room, you know, I mean, and it was really, really wild. At one point before I left, right, by the time I had gotten ready to leave this space, I felt like I had people I didn't even know, but that were ancestrally related to me lined up. Like I used to tell my kids, like we have a whole army on the other side. That's what it felt like. It felt like everyone was there. Everyone showed up. Ancestors that I hadn't even really knew, but the ones that I had grieved were there. You know, so it was absolutely phenomenal. And thankfully, because I have such a great imagination, it was actually very clear. I was afraid that it wasn't going to be. I was like, oh, what if I can't? What if this is the one thing I can't do? I have that. I have that going on for me. So, but I was able to. I mean, my mom looked like she did before she was sick. So before she lost her hair, like she looked for most of my life, right? Like as a child, she didn't look any older. My Nana and Papa looked like they looked for most of, like nobody looked like they did when they passed. And no one looked like they did when they were sick. Everyone looked like they did when I knew them at their healthiest. So that was also really, I don't think I really thought about that till just now. Like actually everybody looked like they did at their healthiest point, you know? So it was really, really, and I could hear them. I could talk to them, but I do have inner dialogue, right? So when I read, I hear my words. So I'm not sure that everyone would experience that exactly the same way. but I heard them. It was like I suppose the closest thing I could akin it to for folks is it was like a dream, but I was conscious, it was like a dream, but I was consciously there. It was lucid, like a lucid dream.
Yeah.
Where you can affect like what's happening. I guess that was probably that'd probably be the closest description I could give.
Yeah, that's a great description. And I love what you said earlier on, like, don't get hung up on, is this really happening? Am I making it up in my head? And is it just my thoughts? Now, we've had a lot of guests on the podcast talk about consciousness. And, when you were saying that, what clicked in my mind was, well, even if it is our own thought, we are consciousness, and our deceased loved ones are consciousness. So ultimately, even if it is in our own head or our own thoughts, we're always connected through consciousness because consciousness never dies. So, so I would say then it goes back to, yes, it is a message, because they're consciousness, we're consciousness. And, those thoughts can, intermingle with that consciousness. So, but I love that you also said that too, because Dr. Bakken, who created this, he's said in a lot of interviews that people would ask him, well, do you think the afterlife is real? After you sit across from all of these patients, what do you think? Is there really an afterlife? And he says, that's not for me to decide or to have an answer to. He's like, what I'm focused on is, do my clients feel better afterwards? And are they healing? And, like you said, it doesn't matter exactly how maybe it all works or how we get there. But if you paint something and you feel better afterwards with your grief, then it works. If you do induced after death communication, you feel better and you're walking around with a 3 instead of a 10, well, then it works. It's like sometimes we don't necessarily, I think, have to get so caught up on, the belief of it. It's like, well, is it working? Is it working or not working? And keep doing what works. That's what I would say. So I have one other question for you, and then maybe we'll end it with you reading maybe one or both of your poems. Now, you had said like kind of how you stumbled upon this. You went to go get a reading, right? You were at a medium?
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So you've experienced mediumship before. Can you describe for me the difference between going to a medium and getting messages from your loved one versus going through the induced after death communication and experiencing it on that different level?
Okay. Yes. Okay. I wasn't prepared for this one, but I can definitely answer that. So when you go to a medium, and yes, I've gone to a few different mediums. I've gone to really great. And when I lost Johnny, I definitely went to a medium because I was really feeling that loss of connection. When you go to a medium, they give you messages from that person. They are the medium. They're in the middle. They're the middleman. When you do induced after death communication, you're removing that middleman and you're strengthening your connection to them, right? Instead of having them go through someone else and them being connected to someone else and filtering the messages through. So for me, it felt very much more like it strengthened my connection to the people that were gone. It helped me address some of the guilt, shame, or blame that I had from them, which a medium sometimes does, right? Like sometimes they give you a message that makes you feel better. And I'm not knocking it because it was really helpful for me before I found the afterlife communication, and I, might do it again. But this particular technique allowed me to connect directly and not have the middleman. And it also allowed me to, you can't question it as much, right? Because everything is happening in your own headspace. So it's not like, oh, this person is guessing that I had a Raggedy Ann doll. It's not that, these are real things from your own experiences, from your own mind, from your own processing that help you to connect and really address the things that are really on your heart. And that I think is a huge difference.
Beautifully said. Yes. It's like, mediums, at least for me, can give me that external validation. But when I went through the induced after death, I got internal validation. It was, and it was different. And like you said, mediumship and mediums, I think, have a place for grief work. They do beautiful work, and that validation can come and you can feel at more peace and it feels good. But, it's one thing for somebody to tell you, you look beautiful today, than you looking in the mirror and saying, I feel beautiful today. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to believe that. That's what they said. There could still be a little skepticism, not saying if you go through induced after death communication, you may not be skeptical of what you experience, but it's really hard to put into words. And I feel like you're hitting on it too, is the same feeling that I got. There was like this visceral, solid feeling that overcame my being after this experience that like calmed me in no way. It almost was like something, if there was like a dial of grief, like something clicked to like the next level on the grief journey, that felt like some of that stuff could be put away and but like really felt completed, when you're dealing with shame or guilt or, second guessing yourself and all the would haves, could have, should haves. So, and I've been trying to like get that across too, because, some people say, well, why would I want to do this? I'm just going to go to a medium and let them tell me. And I think that's great. If people want to choose that, absolutely. But there is something really spectacular if you're able to make this contact that will happen inside. That is like, I don't know. I don't think any medium can recreate the experience of an induced after death communication.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only way for them to try to recreate it would be to be possessed by the spirit, because I don't know.
Right.
I mean, no, I really do. I love the mediums that I have gone to, and I very much value them. And they were a critical stepping stone for me in helping me with my grief. Same with, people that I know. But this was, as you and I have said, like more solid and more direct connection to my loved one. And if nothing else, when I address some of that guilt, the shame, the would have, could have, should have, it is easier for me now, even if they come up, to quickly be more self-compassionate, because I have had the conversation with them already.
Right.
So it's just, and I like what you said about the external versus internal validation, because when you go to a medium, they're like, oh, he says that, he is, peaceful over here. And that's wonderful. But when you're in the after death communication, he's telling you directly, I'm okay. And I'm at peace here. And I'm not in pain anymore. Right. So, and that's the big difference between the two. It's just a next level thing, I feel like, and sometimes it's not necessary. You might not have all of these deeper, more complicated things, or maybe you just feel good with like going to a medium, but I highly recommend this to anybody, because it was just, for me, almost like magic. Like I just felt lighter. I felt like I had processed a lot, but I didn't feel like I like dug in the dredges to process a lot. I felt like I got to visit with all my family members and talk it all out. And, now I just remind myself of that when I have difficult days,
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and coming on here, and just the bravery that you have about talking about your life and sharing that and putting it into poems. So there were two that I picked out. One was Life is Too Short, and also I Am My Mother's Daughter. So I'd like to give you the opportunity. Would you like to read both? One?
Sure.
Or, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to start with?
I will start with I Am My Mother's Daughter.
Okay.
I am my mother's daughter. I am proud to be just that. I miss her and love her every day, but nothing can change the facts. She left one day and won't come back, taken by evil, and I want her back. Despite the hurt and pain she caused, her heart was good despite her flaws. I am my mother's daughter. Still, in some ways, I try not to be. My rage is suppressed far more than she, and manipulation does not come easy. I try each day to improve my life, taking lessons and growing from strife. I tried to grow where she was not allowed the time. I try to be better, but I cannot see the line. I am my mother's daughter, complete with flaws and insecurities. I wonder sometimes how it should be, but the fact remains I am undeniably me. I look just like she did, with a slight difference. I have her pain and temper to deal with. Still, the hate I once had in my heart is gone, and I have grown where she could not. Still, I am my mother's daughter. For all that it might imply, I no longer deny it. I no longer fight. She was a strong woman, as am I.
Beautiful. How does that feel reading it?
You know what? I do want to tear up a little bit because it is one of my readers had said my poems feel like, and that's kind of how I feel when I read this. Oh yeah, that's right. I am who I am, and flaws and all, this is what you get. And I'm a good person and I do my best every day, and I have bad days. And that's okay. Because I think that's something that everyone struggles with, right? Like we're all trying to be our best selves, and sometimes all you can do is apologize when you can't be.
Yeah. Well, thank you for reading that. And then do you want to set us up with the inspiration behind the poem, Life is Too Short?
Yeah. So Life is Too Short, I wrote after I lost a cousin who was like a sister to me. People knew her as DJ. I called her Danny. Her name was actually Danielle, and she was a teenager who chose to leave this world. So she had taken her life, and that led me down a massive rabbit hole of self-help and healing, to try to get through things. And so I turned to writing and I wrote Life is Too Short. So without further ado, life is too short. You don't know how much time you have, or if the words you just spoke will be your last, or if you have time to make your dreams come true someday. You might not. Stop waiting for things to fall in place. If you're like me, making everyone happy at your expense, stop for a moment and think, do you want to die like that? It's okay to tell someone who is damaging you to take a hike. No one is worth the years that damage takes away from your life. We don't know when it is that our number will be up. And we waste all this time trying not to feel, trying to be tough. We accept people who add drama, negativity, and hate instead of love, when we should be finding people that will instead build us up. In time where negativity and stress breeds lethal disease like cancer, we need to understand that light, love, and being positive is the answer.
Oh, beautiful, Michol. Thank you so much. I would also love for you to tell our audience where they can find your website, what you have on there, where you're, sounds like you're working on these meditation classes as well. So let them know how they can find you, connect with you, support you, buy your beautiful poetry, buy your books, and let them know where they can find that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So you can find my books on Amazon, as well as on my website, which is www.Lady Mae Impressions, and that's Mae, M-A-E. And if you want a signed author copy, you have to go through my website because Amazon doesn't have signed copies. And so on my website, you can find some of my frequency meditation tracks. You can find my books. You can find any future classes that I'll be having or workshops. And I am putting together at least one workshop per month for meditative creative writing and additional ones for creative writing to help process feelings, emotions, experiences, getting to know yourself, or just writing because you want to write. If you're a writer, you don't need to have any experience for any of that. And recently I just started putting up I'm working on a holiday movie page. So it's a little perk. If you like feel good movies, I'll have a list of them.
Oh, lovely. Awesome. Great. Well, Michol, thank you so much. You were such a wonderful guest to have on our podcast. I love the stories. I really feel like we heal by listening to each other's stories, and really appreciate you coming on to start helping us to spread the word about induced after-death communication therapy. It's really changing people's lives, and, we just want to teach more people about this. Myself and my colleague, we're going to be holding retreats in New York, in upstate New York at Silver Bay YMCA Retreat Center using induced after-death communication. We hold these retreats for people just in groups of 4, so it's very small, very intimate. We have one coming up in March 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. We do require a pre-screening phone call. We just have to check and see if there's any certain medications that some people are on, because that can sometimes block the IADC from happening. So that's the need for the pre-screening call. And if you guys are interested and want to learn more about induced after-death communication with myself and my colleague, you can visit iadcintensives.com. We'll go ahead and put that in the show notes as well. And we're also training, teachers and other therapists about these techniques as well, offering CE credits, which is really cool for people that need those continuing education credits. And all of that information and those retreats and training are also on that website. Again, iadcintensives.com. So I thank you all for listening. I feel like Michol gave you guys so many beautiful sound bites. This is probably an episode that you might want to listen to again and again, share with friends for sure. She just gave us so much valuable wisdom and life experience and so many great tips for those of you who are on this grief journey. Lean into her success, lean into her optimism and the ability that she was able to put down that 10-pound backpack and just carry a 3-pound around now. And just know, if you're in the beginning of all of this, that there's some light on the other side of this. And these are some tools that can help you. So that is it for today. And we're going to sign off for today. And I just want you all to shine on because the world needs your beautiful light. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. If you haven't already, please subscribe and rate and review the Path 11 podcast in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, this podcast is made possible by our sponsor, Path 11 TV. Visit path11tv.com to start a 7-day free trial and start streaming over 100 hours of exclusive video content on consciousness, healing, and life after death. That's path11tv.com, and be sure to use coupon code podcast30 to take 30% off your annual membership. Start satisfying your spiritual curiosity with a membership to Path 11 TV today. Bye for now.